Hello and welcome to another episode of Thoughts Per Episode Classic Doctor Who Edition. Today we will be watching the Aztecs story, which BritBox has flagged as containing some racial stereotypes. I just want to point out the fact that I am not familiar with the Aztecs historically at all, and as far as racial stereotypes goes, I'm a white guy who hasn't had to deal with racism in my life, so I apologise if I miss some things. We've got a yikes meter. I'll be pointing out things as I see them. If I do miss something, please feel free to leave a comment. This was, of course, filmed in the 60s when less expectation was put upon the people who write these scripts and stuff to actually do right by every viewer, but hopefully it's not too egregious. We'll see, I guess. We'll see as we go through. But it's definitely worth mentioning, at least right at the start, that this was a script written by a white British person, and that most of the actors portraying the Aztecs were also white British, so I guess we'll see how they do. Not okay by modern standards, pretty standard by 1963 standards. The Aztecs, Part 1, The Temple of Evil. When Barbara meets the Aztecs, they mistake her for a reincarnation of the High Priest. From what I can tell, from what I've seen, I think the racial stereotype warning probably comes from more, like, I imagine historically inaccurate outfits and the way their culture is depicted, maybe in terms of acting and accents and just general portrayal and stuff like that. I didn't see anything heinous. I didn't see anything that would go on the yikes meter like we saw in the very first episode of this show. But if I am overlooking something again, please feel free to leave a comment. What I can say is that right from the start of this episode, it felt well intentioned, if nothing else. The first thing they do is establish the fact that the ancient Aztecs, they weren't all about ritualistic sacrifice. That's described as being only one part of their civilization, whereas the other part, they are described as being highly civilized. That being said, when they pass by what looks like a rocky table, the Doctor does immediately go straight to, "Oh, I'd hate to be carved up on this." One of the first things that happens in the episode is that Barbara finds some sort of brooch in the ancient tomb that they arrive in, and when she leaves the tomb, she's seen leaving the tomb wearing it, so they assume that she is a reincarnation of a high priest. Personally, I don't know how plausible that is. I feel like you could only stretch that so far. I think they would probably take one look at her and be like, how could you be the high priest? But that's just me. The central conflict revolves around the two sides of the Aztec society, as we were already told. One of them favours ritualistic sacrifice and the other is more civilized. Barbara, obviously, as the high priest, decides that she's going to go along with it and try and root out some of the evil that she sees in their society, and she believes that she can stop the ritualistic sacrificing for good. Very interestingly, the Doctor tells her that this is impossible and that she should not be doing this, and I think this is the first time in this series we really get to the whole changing the course of history theme, although they could have done that in Marco Polo, I don't know. Obviously, that episode was not available. That serial was not available. This is a really bad habit I need to break out of. But yes, the Doctor literally tells Barbara human sacrifice is essential here, don't interfere. When Barbara says that she's going to try and change the whole ritualistic sacrificing part of this culture, the Doctor says you can't rewrite history, not one line, and he is very adamant about it. He says, what you're trying to do here is utterly impossible. I know. Believe me. I know. And I found that really charming because it reminds me of, the 10th Doctor's episode on Mars towards the end of his run, where he's trying to change the course of human history and time is fighting against him and all that stuff. It's really fun to see the foundations of some of that stuff laid all the way back here. And honestly, I feel like with the whole rule of Time Lords not being allowed to interfere with the whole time travel situation, they're not allowed to interfere with history and change it to their own will, I feel like this is laying down the foundations for that kind of Time Lord lore in the future as well. It's also interesting that the man being sacrificed tells Barbara that she denied him the honour of being sacrificed. I was taught in school that the sacrifices would feel honoured to be sacrificed. I do doubt that a little bit now, but again, that's coming from an very uneducated place, I guess. But obviously none of us were there. We don't really know, right? I don't know if there's historical evidence anywhere swaying that one way or the other. That just kind of flares up in my brain as like, oh, that seems like something that might be incorrect. Oh man, I really hate approaching this from a place of ignorance. I need to brush up on my my knowledge of the Aztecs. I'm not taking anything this episode shows me about the Aztecs at face value, but also I don't just want to skip it because I don't know stuff about the Aztecs and I don't want to come across the wrong way, you know? That seems like a bigger error. The Aztecs, Part 2, The Warriors of Death. Barbara's interference in Aztec traditions cast doubt over her supposed divinity. We open this episode with a very angry Doctor because Barbara didn't respect the Aztecs' tradition and or their religion even, which is kind of sad. I was kind of hoping it'd be more that she was meddling with time that made him angry, but it's more to do with the fact that she's not respecting the religion of the Aztecs, which I don't know. Like, I get not respecting people's religion as something as a bad thing, but when their religion is literally ritualistic sacrificing of people, I kind of feel like the modern doctors would probably have something different to say about that. It's definitely a moral quandary of time travel, right? You go back in time, through a series of weird and unlikely events, you obtain a position of power among them. Like, do you still let them do the sacrificing? But again, I more see that moral quandary to do with affecting time travel than anything else. It's a little bit weird that Ian suddenly has the ability to incapacitate people using only his thumb. I don't know where he picked that up, unless that happened during the Marco Polo serial. I kind of doubt it though. It's almost like they saw Star Trek and wanted to give Ian his own version of the Vulcan grip. Of course, the only issue with that is the first episode of Star Trek wouldn't air for another couple of years. Maybe Star Trek stole it from Ian Wright in Doctor Who. Is it Wright? Is his last name Wright? No, Barbara's last name is Wright. Wait, what's he? Chesterton, that's the one. Just like the Doctor in the first few episodes of this season, I cannot remember his name. I like that we get to see what Susan's been up to and she's fitting in well, you know? They're teaching her the values of the Aztec woman and how you're supposed to behave, and as soon as arranged marriage comes up, she's outraged. And I don't think you're blending in very well there, Susan. Like, obviously you don't have to believe in it, but maybe pretend to. The next episode is called The Bride of Sacrifice, so I have a nasty feeling that's going to come up again. Something neat I noticed, there is an episode where the Doctor is heading towards Barbara's chambers, and he knows he shouldn't really be seen entering, so he kind of stops on the way outside, does a covert look around, and then enters. And my brain immediately went, I have seen that clip before. That clip was used in The Name of the Doctor, I believe, in one of Matt Smith's final episodes, where they are establishing a shot of the first Doctor stealing his very first TARDIS. I say his very first TARDIS, I just mean the TARDIS, obviously. But yeah, they used that shot. They took William Hartnell, they cut him out of that shot, and they pasted him into a brand new one. I remember when I first saw that episode, I was like, wait, is this something that actually happened in the first Doctor series? And later on I kind of came to the conclusion that no, obviously it didn't. I kind of skipped over it, but the main plot of this episode was that after beating Ixter in the weird thumb fight he did, Ixter wanted to get revenge on Ian and was going to do so by using a poison on his fingernails, I guess, so that he would win a fight to the death against Ian later on. So there's a nice big wrestle to the death at the end of this episode, and it goes on for far longer than it should have. It was not very good. I must say though, for a show with so many effects which stand out as being like, you can't even get bonked on the back of a head without it obviously not looking like you've been hit, they were pretty good at having Ian be scratched and draw blood. That looked quite realistic. I'm guessing it was more like he just had some sort of like tomato sauce or some dark liquid on his fingernail that he swiped across the actor's wrist, but it really did look like his wrist got cut. For all the time I spend making fun of this show's practical effects, I should probably actually praise it when it works. The episode ends on a cliffhanger when Barbara is called upon as a priest of Yetaxa to use divine intervention to stop this, and it's like, oh, what's she gonna do now? The Aztecs, Part 3, The Bride of Sacrifice. Barbara's divine powers are challenged, and she humiliates Tlaloc. Damn it, I've been avoiding saying his name for so long because I can't fucking pronounce it, and I'm gonna butcher it. Tlalotoxel? Tlalotoxel. Okay. Tlalotoxel. So, Barbara's divine intervention was to whip out a knife and hold it to Tlalotoxel's throat, and, was she just carrying that knife the entire time? Did she just leave her palace and be like, maybe I should take a knife with me, I don't know. Her excuse for using the knife was, why should I use my divine powers when, you know, mortal instruments will suffice, or whatever she said. And I do like how the further this story goes on, the more stretched her, like, people's belief in her as, like, a divine agent of Yetaxa is. One aspect of this story I do find interesting is, you know, obviously Barbara thinks she's doing the right thing by trying to stop human sacrifice, but there's an element of, like, what she's doing is really not okay. She's pretending to be a divine, like, priest. She's, like, taken a leadership role, and she's, like, pretending to be someone she's not. And while that's, you know, potentially pardonable when you're trying to stop human sacrifices from happening, it's still not great. Tlalotoxel comes up with the idea of poisoning Barbara to test her divinity, and he decides to try and poison Barbara in an extremely obvious attempt. Like, if someone who I've been enemies with for the entire time that I've known him, comes up to me and says, "Hi, really sorry about all of that stuff. I want to be friends. Let's begin our new friendship by you drinking this drink I've made you." I would be like, yeah, no, that's obviously poison. But apparently Barbara was going to go for it, and luckily Ian was there to wave in the background, "No, don't do it," kind of thing. In a very comedic way, I would say. I was surprised that after she did that and she scared the other guy away, who I don't remember what his name is, I'm afraid. But she then does admit to Tlatoxel that she's not Yetaxa, which I thought was interesting. I thought she was going to try and brush him off with another, like, "Oh, this would have poisoned even divinity," or something like that. But no, she straight up says to him, "Yeah, okay, I'm not Yetaxa, but if you tell anyone, I'll use my powers as a high priest to manipulate the people into killing you," which I thought was interesting. Interesting, and so very, very pointlessly reckless. I mean, I guess she knows that he's not buying it at this point, so what harm can a confession cause? But I don't know. Tlatoxel seems respected enough within the community for him to say, "She has admitted to me that she is not Yetaxa," and people would just believe him. Meanwhile, the B-plot of this episode goes on where the Doctor and that lady in the garden, whose name I haven't caught, I'm afraid, she's clearly fallen hopelessly in love with him, and I find that quite cute, actually. I was not expecting the first Doctor to get a romance plot, but here we are. I was a little surprised that he didn't realise that he was accidentally enacting this proposal, I guess, by way of mixing the coca beans and drinking it with her and stuff, because she asks him, "You know what this means, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course I do, we're good." But then later on when she's like, "Oh, yay, we're engaged," he's like the camera fucking zooms in on his face, he just like, "Ooh." Now, this does seem a little bit like a stereotypical white man doesn't understand foreign customs plot, accidentally gets himself engaged and has to flee. We'll see how it progresses. It seems fairly innocent right now, but it could turn a bit weird in the next episode, I guess. For now, it's just kind of weirdly wholesome. I like how later on Ian's like, "Where did you get this?" He's like, "Oh, my fiance." And Ian's like, "I see." "You're what?" He's like, "Yes, I made some cocoa and got engaged." I do like that kind of casual, absurd, like, dialogue as a comedic thing. It's good. It's good. There's something quite modern Who about that exchange, actually. I think if I have one criticism with these episodes of Doctor Who, of classic Doctor Who, it's that the Doctor doesn't quite take centre stage in them like he does in modern Who. So exchanges like that where, like, you've got this character of a Doctor who's very much like a little ADHD, even in his first Doctor incarnation, I've noticed, like, a little bit like, "Oh yes, don't worry about that, anyway, on to the next thing." I feel like there's not enough scenes like that in this show, Feels like at its core, this show is more concerned with exploring the world than it is exploring the Doctor. And I guess, actually, now I say it that way, it's not a bad thing, it's just a difference. I can see people criticising New Who for being more invested in the Doctor than in the world that he's in. I can see, basically the opposite of what I just said being a bad thing, but, I guess it's just a difference to point out. Susan gets roped into this plot to bring down Yetaxa because Tlatoxel is like, "Oh, the way to get to her is through her handmaiden, is through her servants." So they try to marry Susan off to the guy who's going to be sacrificed, and when she obviously refuses to do that, she breaks the law and is going to get punished. They then trick Barbara into condoning this punishment, even though she really doesn't want to, without telling her it's for Susan. And now it seems like they're trying to set up this plot where she either has to save Susan or save the person being sacrificed, because she can only leverage her powers as a priest of Yetaxa to save one of them. And if I'm honest, if that's what they're doing, that does seem a little bit contrived. But I do see where they're going with that. We end with the cliffhanger of Ian making his way into the tunnel, which is hopefully going to lead to the tomb where the TARDIS is. But they get caught by that dude who tried to kill him in the duel, and he knows what he's doing, but he's like talking to the Doctor, and the Doctor's like, "Oh yeah, I was just out for a stroll, don't mind me," and he traps Ian in there with a big, definitely heavy, definitely not made of polystyrene slab, while water rushes in, pardon me, to flood the tunnel. You know what, leaving that burp in, it adds character. The Aztecs, Part 4, The Day of Darkness. Can the Doctor and his companions escape before they are sacrificed to the Sun God? I'm assuming yes, or this would be a very short series. In classic fashion, the cliffhanger of a previous episode was resolved in about 5 seconds as Ian found a roof panel which helped him escape a tunnel and also very conveniently plonked him out next to the TARDIS. While they're talking about creating a pulley system to make sure that the door opens so that they can slip through it and escape when they're all together, they mention that the Aztecs don't have the wheel, and this struck me as a little bit odd, so I went and looked it up, and I learned something today. All of this is based on very quick Googling though, so that's a massive disclaimer. According to my very quick Googling, the wheel was invented around 3500 BC, which is thousands of years before the events of this episode took place with the Aztecs, but apparently, though it is now believed that the Aztecs were aware of the wheel, they just did not incorporate it into their society. So that's interesting, isn't it? Again, this might have been common knowledge. Again, I know extremely little about the Aztecs. Now, I found it a little bit amusing that Ian was framed again, obviously after the High Priest got whacked, not Yataxa, but like the male one. I really need to start looking at these names, hang on. Ortlock, his name was Ortlock, there we go, IMDb is my friend, here we go. I pledge to always have IMDb open to reference character names when making these videos from now on. It makes life a lot easier, doesn't it? Anyway, Ian is framed for whacking Ortlock, who promptly wakes up and also points to Ian, even though Ian would have no reason to bonk him on the head. For some reason, even though Tlatoxel has been very hostile towards Barbara and Ortlock has seen all of that happening, he just immediately trusted Tlatoxel and Ixal when they said that Ian was the one who snuck up behind him and whacked him on the head. Luckily though, the framing of Ian was not the premise for the entire episode this time. I have a note here that just says PP from, like capital letters, PP from. I don't know, why did I write that? What does that mean? The love story between the Doctor and Kameka was wrapped up fairly quickly, and without much pomp and circumstance. At one point she just turned around, looks at the wheel he's whittling, and says, I have a feeling that thing is going to take you away from me, and he just kind of like turns his head a bit and looks into the distance, and she knows that it's over. It's so sad. Luckily it doesn't bring up like the whole man must escape from stereotypical marriage thing that I thought it was going to, so that's good. In fact, you know what? This entire four-parter, this entire serial, I don't think there was a single yikes. As far as the yikes meter goes, as far as throwing out a yikes, it has to be something that makes me go yikes. Like, knowing that this was played by white British actors and all of that, like, obviously that's like, oh dear, but also, it's like the 1960s as well, you know, it's not like, ooh, yikes, you know. I had many concerns going into this serial, but actually, it was a pleasant watch. I actually quite enjoyed it, and I wasn't, you know, cringing at any point, really. I like how the Doctor does, at the end of the episode, pause and look wistfully back towards the door that he's escaping from, because he's thinking about Kameka. Like, he clearly had some sort of feelings towards her as well. He was very fond of her. One thing I noticed about this episode, or I noticed in this episode, is that Ian always has to fight. Like, he's clearly the character that's part of a TARDIS crew because he's the one who does the fighting when there needs to be fighting. That's not really a thing in Modern Who, but much like the classic Star Trek, which I have seen a few episodes of, there's a lot of, like, ritualistic combat fighting in these episodes. As far as an Ian fight scene goes, I think it was pretty good. I like that they were circling the table of sacrifice. That's slightly poetic there. And then the fight probably ends when he kicks Ixta down the stairs to his death. At the end of the episode, there is a moment where Barbara says, what is the point of travelling through time and space if you can't change anything? And the Doctor has a great line where he says, you failed to save a civilization, but at least you saved one man. It reminds me of the Fires of Pompeii episode where the Doctor's telling Donna that they have to leave, they can't save anyone. This is just how history happens and all of that. And she says, I'm not asking you to save everyone, just one family. Which is something that comes up again during Peter Capaldi's era, which is really cool. It's like a through line of this entire show. Oh, I forgot to mention, there was a scene where when they are escaping, Ian and Susan, is the Doctor there as well? I've forgotten already. I think it's just Ian and Susan. When they're escaping, Kameka has come to tell the guard, like, oh, she's trying to bribe him, basically, to let them escape, and he's thinking about it, and Ian just comes up, gets his fists together, and whacks him on the back of the neck, and it seems like this is obviously before the Centauran were a thing, but it seems like that is everyone's weak spot. Just a good old thump on the back of the neck and you go down and you're out cold for a good 10 minutes. Also, I'm not sure why Tlatoxel told Ixta to kill that guard when they found him unconscious. That just seemed a bit unnecessary. I was about to say this seemed like an episode or a serial where nobody seemed to really die, but obviously Ixter was killed by Ian at the end, as well as that guard being unceremoniously murdered. But yeah, I've kind of already given my summary of what I thought about the entire serial within this, so that was the Aztecs. Much better than I expected. I really enjoyed it, actually. Next episode, we will be looking at the final available serial in the season, the Censorites. I know there's a story after that. We'll look at the synopsis of that one at the end of that episode too. Thank you for all of your lovely comments so far, telling me things I didn't know about the show, about the filming of it, telling me about how to access other episodes. I'm not sure I'm going to be grabbing the animated stuff for Patrick Troughton's era, unfortunately, but I probably will go back and watch them at a later date when they are added to BritBox, because it seems like there's kind of like a gap of time where they're only available to buy and then they appear on BritBox from what I've heard, so maybe we'll do that. If they are really integral to the overall story of the season or Patrick Troughton's Doctor, let me know and I will reconsider, but at the moment I'm not really looking to drop money on like 4 episodes of Doctor Who. It's always seemed, I don't know, it's always seemed a little like it's not worth it to me personally. It's why I've never watched Classic Who up until now. It seems like a lot of money to shell out for like, it's like £10 per serial, you know? And you can already see how many serials we've gotten through in like 1 month of BritBox, so that's why I'm doing it now, because they're on BritBox. So yeah, that's kind of my stance on that. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like if you like the video, leave a comment if you want to let me know anything about what happened during the filming of this serial or anything fun like that. And I'm going to leave you with some bloopers. If you thought I got through, I barely got through naming Tlatoxel and pronouncing it correctly, boy do I have some bloopers for you. Bloop. But she then does admit to oh, god damn it, so close. Bloop. But she then does admit to oh god damn it, this name is so hard to say. Bloop. But she then does oh my, I'm tripping over every word now. Bloop. For some reason, even though fuck. Bloop. That's not really a thing in a modern Who. Bloop. Also, I'm not sure why it's locked still. Fuck. Bloop. Tlatoxel. Bloop.